what makes it really bold is they're moving on from a successful offensive coordinator. So he better be right, because that warms the job security seat, in my opinion. Had a few conversations with various people about Blau. I think, the question now that he's hired is, what's the offense going to look like? It's impossible to know for sure. It's not like we have a history of David Blough coordinating, an offense and calling plays. It's not like we can go back to, the 2022 Jacksonville team where he was an OC. We don't have any of that. He's never done it before. So you have to pull from his experiences. I think I talked about, on Monday's show, some of the things that maybe some of you don't know about David Blough, one of which is he was a hell of a college quarterback his final year at Purdue, playing for Jeff Brom, who is an offensive guru as a head coach in college football. He had quite the senior year at Purdue before not going drafted in that particular draft, signing eventually with Detroit and bouncing around. And we know that his exposure in the NFL, it started with Darrell Bevell, who was the offensive coordinator in 2019, when Blau actually started the final 5 games of 2019 because Matt Stafford and the backup, Jeff Driscoll, Jeff Driscoll, both of them, were hurt. And so Blau started the last 5 games. Darrell Bevell was the offensive coordinator with Matt Patricia as the head coach. Ben Johnson was a professional exposure for him. Kevin O'Connell was a professional exposure for him. He was in Minnesota for nearly a year. And of course, Cliff Kingsbury on 2 counts, once in Arizona, where he quarterbacked a game or 2 at the end of a season for Cliff Kingsbury when he was the head coach. And of course, the 2 seasons here with Blau on Cliff's staff. So those are the influences. Jeff Brom, by the way, I'm sure is an influence as well. But in terms of the pro influences, it's, Cliff Kingsbury, Ben Johnson, Kevin O'Connell, and Darrell Bevell. When Ben brought up Darrell Bevell's name the other day on the show as somebody who could be brought in, I thought that was a very interesting thing. Now, they have requested an interview, or maybe they've already interviewed, DJ Williams, the quarterback coach in Atlanta, who's been helping Michael Penix develop. And also, I will tell you, Kirk Cousins, a fan of DJ Williams. He is the son of, our legend, Doug Williams. DJ Williams has been reached out to and hopefully will be interviewed. They need a quarterbacks coach. They need an offensive line coach. They need an assistant quarterbacks coach, with Blau, taking 2 steps up, and Tavita Pritchard getting the head coaching job at Stanford. But when you try to consider what Blau's offense will be, it's kind of hard to know, other than to just take from the experiences that he's had. So for me, in thinking about it and in talking to some people, there's one thing more than any other that I would guess, I don't know for sure, that I would guess will be a part of the offense and wasn't with Cliff. And I think that part will be a significant increase in play action pass attempts, married to a run game married to a play action passing game with Jaden Daniels. Why? Well, his experiences with Ben Johnson and Kevin O'Connell, way up there on the list of guys that throw via play action more than anybody else. Detroit was number 1 under Ben Johnson in 2024 on play action pass attempts. They were 3rd this year without Ben Johnson, but Chicago this year with Ben Johnson, 2nd in the league with Caleb Williams in play action pass attempts. Minnesota, Kevin O'Connell, 3rd last year when they had Sam Darnold. This year they were 11th. I mean, they had some quarterback issues. By contrast, the 2 years that Blau spent here in Washington with Cliff Kingsbury, Washington was 20th in the NFL in 2024 in play action pass attempts. They were 28th this year. And play action off of a marriage, if you will, to the run game, and that run game can be versatile. It can be a lot of zone, which is what Adam Peters obviously saw a lot of in San Francisco, inside zone, outside zone, but it can be a lot of power. It can be a lot of gap as well. But I think a run game tied to a top 5 to top 10, worst case, play action pass attempt team is, for me, the one thing that I'd be surprised if we don't see with David Blough as the coordinator and the play caller. I'm not sure anybody can really know beyond that. Yes, there will be an element of, creativity and trickery if he's taking a lot from Ben Johnson. But I think what we've seen here for 2 years is we've seen the lower end of a run game married to a play action pass team. There are many different ways. Okay, they were 20th in the league in play action pass attempts in 2024, but they were a top 3 to top 5 defense, worst case, in the league. There are a lot of different ways to be great offensively. We saw it in 2024, but I think this is what Quinn wants. And this is what Blau has been exposed to prior to the 2 years with Cliff. That, to me, would be the surprise. I think predicting anything else about what Blau will do when you don't have an actual, resume of being a coordinator or a play caller is difficult to determine. But that, to me, is the one. And I think would love Jaden in almost any offense. By the way, will that happen more under center or more in pistol? Play action passing really doesn't happen as much out of shotgun in terms of the traditional turn your back at least a bit to the defense play action, which is more effective typically. Play action under center, you turn your back, the defense loses sight of the football, especially with good ball handling quarterbacks in terms of play fakes. And the pistol, you turn your back to a certain degree. Shotgun is more of a mesh. The ball's always exposed in play action, but with a back behind you, and that's the pistol. Remember, shotgun back is by your side or isn't there at all, an empty set. Pistol is a back directly behind the quarterback. So even though he's not under center, snap comes and he turns to hand off or turns to play fake. That's why you've seen the Rams have a lot of pistol and play action. They're under center for a lot of their play action, but there's a lot of play action from pistol with Matt Stafford as well. There's a lot of, and there was last year in particular, and even with Penix Jr. in Atlanta, Zach Robinson from the Sean McVay Shanahan tree, a lot of pistol where, people complained Kirk wasn't under center last year. That's where he's been most effective. Well, he was in pistol with play action, but they just actually didn't run as much play action as they had in the past. That was more the issue. But you can play action effectively out of pistol. That's what I think is going to be the most noticeable thing. And maybe it'll end up being that there's no hurry up or less hurry up, less up tempo, less no huddle. And that would be noticeable, obviously, if they end up going that route, if he ends up going that route. But I don't have any guess on that. Pace of play is more important than whether or not you huddle, into a defense. Now, when you huddle, the substitutions sometimes come a little bit faster. When you no huddle, sometimes they come a little bit slower. Not always. But maybe under center, no huddle, those are the things that are more noticeable. But I think in terms of scheme and what happens post-snap, I think marrying run game to pass game, specifically play action passes, that's going to be a big part of the attack. And it hasn't been for 2 years. Yeah. And, just one more on this whole conversation of Blau. It's bold, Um, but I'm okay with it as a fan of the team. I think Cliff did a good job here because he did a good job here. They even know he did a good job there. It's just a philosophical difference. They're moving on from it. Um, I'm okay with not letting the next big thing, if that's how they view him. And by the way, they're not the only ones that view him that way. Let's not forget that there were teams last year that wanted to talk to Blau. Washington blocked those interview opportunities. This year, Detroit wanted to interview him for their OC job. He was a guy that was sought after. There are a lot of people, not just here, but around the league, that believe that David Blough, like the guy in Jacksonville and a couple of others, could be the next big thing, could be the next Ben Johnson or Kyle Shanahan or Sean McVay. Not wanting him to leave the building, I think, has always been in the back of Dan Quinn and Adam Peters' mind from the moment he said yes to their offer to be the assistant quarterbacks coach. I think that they saw a world in which Cliff left after a year or two to take a head coaching job, and Blau became the OC. I believe that if Blau weren't here and Tavita Pritchard had moved on, that Cliff might still be here. Now, if Cliff wasn't going to evolve to where they wanted to see offensively, scheme-wise, maybe that was always in the cards that he was going to move on. But I think Blau being in the building made this possible as much as anything else did. He just has to be right about it. Because I do believe this, even though it's hard to fast forward, to the end of the year and project what that context would look like around a losing season or a non-playoff season. But as we sit here now, the seat's much warmer than it was. When you swap out after 2 years, defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator, both of whom were among your first hires as a head coach, then you can't afford for those hires, specifically on offense, because he's replacing a guy that was successful offensively, which makes the move bold. That's why the move's bold. It's bold in part because he's never been a coordinator, but we see that all the time. People identified as talents and being elevated from quarterbacks coach to OC or from another position to OC, O-line coach, whatever it is. But what makes it really bold is they're moving on from a successful offensive coordinator. So he better be right, because that warms the job security seat, in my opinion. And here's the other thing too, man. For this franchise, you don't want your third-year quarterback to be playing with a new coordinator that was bold and doesn't work out, because then it looks like a throwaway year and he's into year 4 already. So the decision needs to be the right one. I think they're very confident that it is. Of course, talk is cheap, and they're not talking about it, not yet anyway. We'll hear about that at some point. But they've got to make this work. Looking forward to it. They need a few more pieces, and they need a lot better luck when it comes to their best players being on the field. And like I've said multiple times since the season ended, they need the defense to improve significantly. That impacts the offense. The offense can't take the field for a third straight season knowing that if they don't go for 27 or 28 plus, they're probably going to lose the game. That can't be the environment that you put the offense in for a third straight year.